And this guy was like, I'm taking my wife to dinner, you know? And it was such a little thing. It was such a little thing that meant
Yeah.
so much because, and it was just that tap on the shoulder. It was that little bit of
Yeah.
acknowledgement.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to Truth Works, where we dig into the nitty gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
So pretty interesting this morning, getting our feedback from our production crew, huh?
I know. We told them to give us feedback and they did. We said we love feedback.
Right. And we screw things up a lot. But the reason I wanted to bring it up was, when you get in the habit, it kind of never stops. And I find myself talking to everybody, my plumber, my, whoever I'm talking, my housekeeper, my friends, like, just tell me, and then we'll get through it and then it'll be great. And don't worry, you can't really hurt my feelings. It's helpful.
No, it is. But I think the challenge with giving feedback, it is very hard to get into the habit. It's hard to break through that barrier of fear and uncomfortableness. And whether you're giving it or hearing it, it's hard to do both. And I think that's what we should talk about today. Is like, how do you get comfortable with it?
I agree. And I have a couple of comments. One of them is it's a skill, right? And it's not natural to do it, particularly at work, right? But you can learn it and you get better at it with practice. And like I said, and you don't get weird about it after a while. You realize that it's a really helpful thing to do with the people that you care about working with and that care about being friends with. The second thing is it's fascinating to me that whenever I'm asked to talk about giving feedback, it's always about negative feedback. Right. And everybody assumes that it means saying something really mean or crappy or, evil to somebody in a really nice way so it doesn't hurt their feelings. And one of the things I want to say from the get-go is that's kind of like guilt tripping. Right. So those of us that are parents know how to do that. It's like that bad thing that you did, that was a bad thing. And if you do that bad thing again, I want you to feel really bad. And the next time they do, they will, because they'll do it again, right? I mean, it's the hit you over the head feedback mechanism, and it works. It's just slow. And there's another kind of feedback that we always forget, which is like the doing it right one. Oh, Jessica, thanks for saying that in this meeting today. That was super helpful. Do that again, and you will.
Yeah.
And it's it brings me to another part, which is like in the moment is so successful, but if nothing else, learn that saying great job in the moment, as corny as it sounds, is really, really productive and not that hard.
No, and so important, right? When we think about feedback, we think about the negative and it's pointing out what you did wrong. And I think that's where also the fear comes from, because the minute somebody says, "Hey, I want to give you some feedback," your wall just goes up because you're like, "Oh, fuck, what did I do?" And
Right,
you don't even know what you did and you have no idea what they're going to say. And it's a little bit terrifying. And I think that, and this is one of the things I used to think about in being a CHRO, especially at Netflix, because we were really good at giving feedback and we were really good at giving critical feedback, because we were always, what can we do better? What can we do better? What can we do better? It was sort of this aim and aspiration to be exceptional all the time. And we never did any of the celebratory stuff. It was like, maybe for a second, they'd be like, "Oh, that was good. Okay. What can we do better? What can we do better?" And so we sort of got in this habit of just being super uber critical of everything. And no one was hearing the good stuff, right? And you had all of these high performing people who didn't know they were high performing, right? They knew what they could do better, right? Because we were very good at telling them, but they didn't know what they were doing well. And I think that is something we have to reframe with feedback, is that feedback isn't just critical. Feedback is also the good stuff, right?
I totally hear you. And I've been so lucky since I've left that I've done lots and lots of talks with professional coaches, like professional sports coaches, the coach of the San Jose Spurs and the coach of this incredible winningest hockey teams ever. And if you look at them, I look at sports in a different way now because I'm not that big of a fan, but I watch the coaches. And there's a very, like the physical, when somebody does great on the field, as soon as they come off, their coach and all their teammates are like, yeah, great job. So, I think it's really important. The other thing I was thinking about was like, we both, I'm sure, have lots of examples of really crappy feedback. And I was thinking about today, what story would I tell of somebody who's given me feedback that wasn't helpful? And I realized that almost every example I came up with was criticism of me as a person, not me as a worker. And it wasn't in, so goofy things come up in your head, right? So one of mine was a CFO saying to me that I didn't dress appropriately for an HR person.
I know this one, Patty. I've heard this one.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm working with a bunch of people who I have to remind them to wear shoes occasionally, right? And it's like, what do you want me to? Am I supposed to shop at J.C. Penney for career outfits?
Yeah, wear your stockings.
Because when you used to go to HR conventions, you'd look around and go, where do they shop? Right? It's like, who has career dresses? But the other one I got one time was somebody who had done a flip chart on all the things that were wrong with me. I'm too outspoken. I defy authority. I tell inappropriate jokes. I use humor inappropriately. I don't respect my superiors, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it just went on and on about, kind of what a rebel I was. And then as soon as he was done, he's like, and we need to talk about how to help you become a more professional and appropriate and successful human resources executive. And I thought, wow, that's a list of all the things I do really well.
I know. I got, it's so funny because I got the very similar feedback in my career, maybe because we're cut from the same cloth. And, I think sometimes some of your biggest strengths can be a weakness, right? Like, we both have a sense of humor, and it's, at the end of the day, these are jobs. And it's like, it's not, nobody's got,
yeah, that's right. Right. Nobody's going to die.
Nobody's going to die today. We're, it's like, let's take a little bit of the seriousness off the table and be humans for just a second. But I got similar people. Your sense of humor is sometimes misused. Okay, well, did I get all the work done? And did I do it really? And then did I do it really well? Okay, yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing with feedback, and I think I learned this from you, and I don't think I came up with this on my own, but I think you taught me this. But feedback is a gift.
That's right.
Right? And you don't have to like every gift you're given. Right? That's right. Like, somebody gave you some socks and they're like purple socks, and you're like, I don't really like purple, and I didn't really need socks, but they went out of their way to give you purple socks. So you should think about why and be grateful that they did, right? You don't have to agree that purple socks is, right or wrong. Just like with the sense of humor thing, I reflected on it and I was like, okay, maybe there's some truth in that. I don't know, but I'm going to reflect on it and think about it.
Yep.
And then I can return it to the feedback store if I don't agree. You know?
Yeah. Well, I stole it
Yes.
from Leslie Kilgore, who is our CMO at Netflix a long time ago. And she added this to that. She's like, feedback's a gift. And so don't give it thoughtlessly. Pick out something special, something the person can use, and wrap it up and put a bow on it. And give it with sincerity.
Yeah, I like that.
So she had more to it than that, which really made me think about it. And I was thinking about great feedback. And so back in the day at Netflix, when we did our million different ways of doing 360 reviews, and when I was there, I think I tried a completely different system every year, and I never totally got it right, to be fair. Maybe you did. I didn't. But I used to, I would put up feedback that I had gotten. So I would go into a room and I would have my, projector, and I would say, okay, here's feedback I got in my last performance review or my last 360. And one of them was, you seem really nice and the people on your team are too. You do a good job hiring. Everybody seems competent and knows what to do in a friendly way, right? So I say to the audience, what do you think of this feedback? And they're all like, oh, that's great. I'm like, that is useless. That's called like the criteria for the job. And it's not even that high of a, bar. It's like, of course they're friendly and know their stuff. Duh. Like, that's not helpful. And then I show one that I got from a member of our team when you were there. And this person said, I love our staff meetings. You always say things that we don't hear anywhere else. You're really funny and articulate, and you use up all the air in the room. And I come in, prepared to ask you really important questions for me about business strategy or what we're going to do. And we never have time for it because you're always talking. So it would be really helpful sometimes, Patty, if you just shut up. And I put that right on I put the slide up and I say, what do you think about this feedback to the audience? And people are like, oh shit, career limiting move. I can't believe somebody said that to you. And I was like, that's great feedback. It was so helpful. And it had, the best part about it was it had instructions for what I needed to do better. And what I needed to do better was just
Patty?
Shut up sometimes. And you probably don't remember because I talk all the time, but I tried to remember
you doing that. Yeah.
Always leave 10 minutes at the end of the meeting, so that people could ask me questions, because I can talk forever. And so it has lasted me the rest of my life, that one little tidbit that was just listen.
Isn't it interesting how like one little piece of feedback can change you forever? It's so powerful. And yet, we're so apprehensive to do it. I think what we did well, Patty, though, and I learned this from you, and hopefully a lot of other people learned it from me, is that we tried to make it normal. We tried to make it part of our everyday, and we taught people how to do it. And how we taught people how to do it was, one, doing it ourselves, right? So the simplicity of asking for feedback all the time till it's like nauseating. It's like, you end your meeting, hey, can I have some feedback? Hey, can I have some feedback? In a meeting with lots of people in it, hey, can I have some feedback? And then people would see somebody on your team give you feedback and you didn't fire them. You like embraced it. And then the next day you changed. And then the thing that you just said, like we shared the feedback we got. We put it up on a Google Doc and shared it with the entire company and said, hey, here's all my feedback that I got. Right. And then we practiced, like we practiced and we taught people how to do it with care and empathy. Right.
Right. The skills of doing it. Right. And the other thing I think that I believe, and I know you believe, is that it's a mechanism for everybody to help everybody be better. It's not from your boss. Right. It's not the end of the year performance review where your boss is going to tell you all the things you did wrong in the last entire year and what you could do better for next year when it's too late to fix it anyway. And what you're describing is something I absolutely remember with you and the people on my team. Was I remember that when I would prepare for our one-on-ones, I was like, oh, I got to ask Jessica how that last meeting went, right? From her perspective, because I tried to do better, and did I, right? And so that frequency, particularly manager to subordinate feedback, is something that is a really good rhythm to get into. But you're right. The other part of that is asking the other way around. What could I do better? I've been trying to work on stuff. You know, at Netflix, we had this thing where we did stop, start, continue. We'd go around and we would, that was the framework of one of our feedback sessions. And I remember doing it once at an executive meeting. And I mean, it was really scary. We did it, to each other, for each other, around the room with everybody else listening. I mean, and it was really emotional. And then, unbeknownst to me or anybody else, not an HR program, not an HR initiative, not a branded HR thing, a couple of the people from that meeting went to their teams and said, hey, by the way, here's what we did at executive staff the other day, and here's some feedback I got about how I could be a better leader. Let me know, what do you guys think? And then pretty soon that became a habit with a lot of teams around the company. And what was my favorite part of that story is we didn't do it.
No.
Right? We didn't send out a form. We didn't say, here's an alternative way to give feedback that might be really useful in your team. And the other thing about that particular instance was it allowed people to learn, to give them an opportunity to say in words to each other things that were hard to say, and not A, hide behind email or the computer, or B, the other thing I want to talk about is anonymous feedback. So in all of the iterations that I did when I was there for 14 years of 360 feet, I bought software, I did and Reed and I used to have this argument all the time about should it be anonymous or not. And his argument was that people wouldn't give their superiors, their managers, they wouldn't give executives honest feedback because they were fearful of retaliation. And so it was part of the software engineering, whatever vibe, to make it anonymous. And I remember having arguments with other leaders around the company who are like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be candid, but we're anonymous. Like, this doesn't ring true. We don't like this. This doesn't, how people are so black and white. This isn't consistent with our values. And so one year, people signed their names in the feedback. Hey, Jessica,
I remember that
here's a couple of things that you could do better. And here's what happens when you do this thing, and here's what you could do better. Love, Kevin. And I remember Reed's like, people signed this. I'm like, yeah,
because it was important to them, because it was part of our culture. And the thing too about anonymous feedback is the magic is really in the follow-up.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if it's written, right? So if Kevin writes me this feedback, says love Kevin, but if I don't have the love Kevin, I don't know Kevin wrote it. Right. So I can't go to Kevin and say, gosh, thank you for giving me this feedback. I didn't know. Can you tell me more? Right.
Yeah. Right.
And that was my thing, was that the feedback is important, but the follow-up is also important. Right. And there's magic that happens in those conversations. And I think that, one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader is to build, and everybody talks about like, how do I have a culture of feedback? How do I have a culture of feedback? Is you are feedback ready, you are feedback open, you ask for it all the time, you follow up with your teams, you make it part of every team meeting, you make it part of every one-on-one, and then you yourself are asking for it all the time. And then when you receive it as the leader, you're not defensive about it, you don't argue about it, you take it, you listen, and you say thank you.
Right.
Right? Even if you don't agree with it in the moment, you say, thank you
for that gift.
I'm going to think about this. I really appreciate it. I'm going to follow up with you. Like there's sort of this art that you have to kind of have in these conversations. And there's grace as a leader that you have to receive this information. And if you can do that, which is hard to do, but if you can do it, you will start to have a culture of feedback and you will start to normalize it.
Yeah, I got asked by somebody I know to do, it's a group of people that are authors of other books. And this other author said, hey, let's do a session. It's called the Silicon Guild. Let's do a session with the Guild, you and me, to talk about trust. And because that's a big thing everybody cares about, and it's really important. And she wants to talk about trust in relationships, and I'm supposed to come on and talk about trust at work. And I realized that what builds trust at work is that when you say you're going to do something or you commit to changing, that you do. Right. And when you do it over and over and over again, that builds trust. It's not falling out of a tree. It's not opening your heart. It's not bleeding all over the place. And the feedback part is so important to that. Like if you see me, we have a conversation and you tell me something, that example, right? You really need to shut up sometimes. When I actually do, then the people that gave me that feedback trust that I'm going to listen and I'm going to do something about it, right? And it's funny because, you and I both get asked to pick apart all these different parts of how you work. And it's all part of the system, right? And the system, I was thinking as we were talking about radical candor, right? Like, I wish I had never, ever used that word, even though I stole it, because it's not radical to be candid. It's just called being honest. And I think that that's the part, one of the things that people ask is, is it about a manager to subordinate? Is it okay to give feedback to your boss? What about skip levels? What about what's the method? What's the rhythm of doing that? And what I heard you just say is as often as possible. And if we could make it be as often as possible and 50% of it's positive.
Yeah.
Just imagine how quickly you might be. And it's sometimes it's not about here's the things you could do to get better, but it's about, I don't know. I mean, you seem bored. Is the work we have for you the right work?
Yeah.
And that, and that's, I don't know if it falls in the category of feedback, but kinda. It's like you just seem cranky. So like, what the hell?
Well, I do think that's feedback, and I think that a few things here. So when you're normalizing things, and I think you're right about the radical kind of quote, because it also enhanced this thing that inherently helped it be more critical, right? Like it had to be radical, and radical can't be, you seem cranky today, or, you seem bored. Radical is like, let me tell you something, that's going to blow your mind here and knock you off your kilter. Right. Like,
yeah, right.
That, like that, there's so much like strength in that word, but feedback is an everyday thing. Like, hey, you don't seem yourself today. Is everything okay? And guess what? From asking that question, you may find out that they lost someone in their lives. Right. And they're not themselves that day. And then what can you do as an, colleague to support them? Right. Because you just asked. And I think that if we can find a way to practice it every day, it's not this radical thing. It's just a thing that you do, and you do it because you care, and you care about the people you work with, and you want to make them better, and you want to help them. And if we come at it from that angle, then we don't have to be so fearful of the reaction or what's going to happen. When there's that pressure for it to be radical, I would, like, oh God, I need to be radical here. That's a lot of pressure. Like, no, just be a human. Right?
Well, and I've found that, I mean, I certainly have given radical feedback.
Of course.
I mean, I have certainly taken VP wannabes and closed the door and pushed them up against it and going, I know what you want. I know you're ambitious, but you're an asshole and we're not going to promote you because you're an asshole. So here's the deal. Let's think of 10 things you can do that might not have people perceive you to be kind of a jerk that doesn't listen very well. Mm-hmm. Because when you get really good at that, then your ambition will work out.
Yeah.
Right. You if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to be a leader, you have to have followers. What a concept.
What you do? But I think, Patty, like you just said something important there, because if you use that example, what you told that person was the truth. It's not that radical. It is true. It may be radical for them to hear, but it's true. And then you followed it up with, what can we do about it? Right? You didn't just say you're an asshole. Like, you're not going to be promoted ever because you're just a jerk.
Right.
You said, hey, you're an asshole. However, I can help you. Right.
Well, and this person happened to be the classic brilliant asshole.
Those
right.
are the best.
Which everybody talks a lot about. And they're like, do you or don't you tolerate the brilliant asshole is always a thing in Silicon Valley. And it's probably a thing wherever anybody works. There's that person who is the star. I only want A players. I only want stars. But, those people have probably heard a form of this feedback most of their adult career lives, right? And no one has probably ever said, you don't have to be. I can give you some tools on how to be better at it. Like sometimes in meetings when you're taking up all the room and for this particular person and you raise your voice and you seem really stern, you could just here, let me tell you what's worked for me. Shut up. And go around the table and say, Jessica, what do you think? Because people perceive you to not care about what they think. So here's a little tip. Why don't you, in front of other people, ask them what they think? And it's just, it's the little nuances.
It's the little things, but I think it's delivery, how you deliver it. You're delivering it with care. You're delivering it with truth. But you're also delivering it with help or support or solutions or ideas or thoughts on what they could do differently. And that is where people get the feedback, is through the example, the specific example that you're sharing them, but then other things that they should consider or do differently. And then the other thing that I think about with feedback often, I don't know, I'm sure you experience this, but there'd be somebody that we needed to give some feedback to. It's like, okay, so-and-so's doing something like, hey, they report to you, go give them this feedback. And then you ask them, hey, did you give them the feedback? And they're like, yeah, I gave them the feedback. But then that person, you follow up with the person they gave the feedback to, they didn't give them the feedback. Right. And so, and maybe they tried, and maybe it could
have been the classic shit sandwich.
Yeah.
Hey, you look great today. I love your hair. Oh my God, that outfit's so cute on you. By the way, you talk too much. But how's the pets?
Yeah. But that's the other thing I think with feedback is like, did they hear you?
Yeah.
Did they hear what you had to say?
Yeah.
Right? And if you shit sandwich it, they're not going to hear it. I mean, I think it was Erin we had on, and she gave the example of, or maybe this was just one of her talks. I don't remember whether she mentioned it on the episode with us or not, but she gave this example of a performance review, and the American manager with a French woman, and he gave her all the good stuff before, but because she was French, like French are very direct and kind of clear. And which she had never had a performance review of that she ever got any good stuff. And so then all she was focused on was like, I did all this good stuff. And then at the end, he was telling her all the things that she needed to improve. But then she walks out and he's thinking she's got a lot of work to do. She walks out thinking she did amazing, right?
She's amazing.
Got all this positive feedback. Yeah. And he's like, no, she's not doing amazing. So, I mean, it's like, did they hear you? Because she didn't hear anything he said. After he said, I think you're doing a good job.
Right. And the other part is people forget the part B, which is here's what you could do differently. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have an idea about, you make me crazy, you're too aggressive, particularly when you cross those cultural barriers. Mm-hmm. Right. Speak up, speak up, speak up. If you come from a culture where people don't speak up, then you got to learn to ask them. Then they will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. But they don't, but it's not natural. And so the other thing I was thinking of that's just a little off the wall, but I think is really important about motivation, feedback as motivation. Most people, in my experience, particularly when they're early in their management career, assumed that they're going to motivate people the way they want to be motivated, right? We're going to bring you up in front of the rest of the team. All 300 people are going to see us give you the award for coolest employee of the quarter, finder of most problems. Yay, right? And particularly for introverts, that's not helpful. In fact, there's nothing they would like worse than that. Mm-hmm. And so I remember this is a Reed story. I love telling Reed stories. So I say to him, this is when I first met him at the other company, hey, your homework for this week is to go find 5 people doing something right and tell them. He's like, why is that homework? I'm like, I just want you to do it. I think it's tough for you. I mean, you're the guy that is a problem finder and you're really, really exceptional at that. But, just give it a try. He's like, well, I could do that in 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, go do it. And he said, well, how do you know? And I said, they'll tell me. He goes, oh, yeah, I'm sure. I'm like, no, trust me on this one. You do it. They'll tell me. Monday goes by, Tuesday goes by, Wednesday goes by. I see him in the hallway. I'm like, hey, is it me and people aren't coming to talk to me, or is it that you haven't done this? Oh, well, I'm a CEO. I got a lot of CEO things to do. I'm very busy. It's very important. I'm like, is it that you can't do it? Because I'll tell you 10 people right now. I mean, I'll just give you the names and you just need to go by and tell them. Okay, it's not that hard. Well, I think I can do it, but I think I know who's doing stuff right around here. I'm like, okay, then do. I mean, it's Friday's day after tomorrow and you haven't done anything. Thursday comes by. At the end of the day, one of the very introverted, QA engineers comes in my room and he's just, oh my God, you know what happened today? Reed came by my cubicle and he said, hey, that was a great thing you did. Everybody's telling me about that bug you found in the software that really helped things. I really appreciate that. Good job. And this guy was like, I'm taking my wife to dinner, and it was such a little thing. It was such a little thing that meant so much and it was just that tap on the shoulder. It was that little bit of acknowledgement. So that's as one of the things I want to tell leaders, again, if you want them to follow, then you got to lead. One of the great things about leadership is that you can say, good job in the moment, and it goes such a long way.
Yeah. And you think about all these companies talk about retention, mm-hmm. right? And we want to retain our star performers. Yeah. Tell them that they're doing good. It fills up the bank in a way that you just can't even understand. That pat on the back, probably that QA engineer stayed for years. Just with that one,
well, or not, I mean, or I'll take it the other way. I mean, my credo is to create great teams to be from. Mm-hmm. And I think we were talking about responses to our podcast, mm-hmm. And how many responses we've gotten from employees that we used to work with, right? And you and I don't work at Netflix anymore either. And what I love about that is that person goes to walk away, if they walk away, feeling like a star.
Yeah.
Right. Having the confidence to go to another organization and make a really big impact and know that they have a skill now of receiving, it's a skill to receive it too.
It is. That's what I was talking
Right.
about
To be able
with
to
the
be,
leader,
you're
to
talking
say
about
thank
listening,
you.
to be able to listen and go, whew, wow, that never occurred to me. Okay. Okay, I better stop and think about that. Instead of saying, which most people do, oh, she just doesn't like me.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that's what she's like.
Right. Probably a lot of those things said about the two of us. However, but the one thing I will say too, not to only tell Reed stories, but the one thing that I think also worked at Netflix was that what Reed was very open about his feedback. And if you gave him feedback, he changed the next day. Yep. He'd start doing it, right?
Yep.
And it was sort of this like, oh wow, like you don't even know if he agreed with it, right? But he's doing it, right?
Yeah.
And and I talk to all these CEOs and I say, you just have to do it. If you do it, everybody will do it, right?
Yeah.
And the brilliant thing was because he did it, his leaders did it, then their leaders did it, and it trickled through the organization. And it became a behavior, and it became a habit.
It wasn't a tops down thing. Mm-mm. It wasn't because he did it. Thus it was so. I mean, there's part of it, but there's part of it, back to the trust thing, was you could see it happening, mm-hmm. and you could see it being effective, mm-hmm. and you would think, if he can do it, so can I.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And I think that's the, I just did this talk yesterday. It's the you can't be it until you see it, whatever that other cliche is, which is, and that's something that you and I both have coached all of our other companies and CEOs and startups to do, which is, how do I create change? How do I create a culture that's really impactful? How do I, teach everybody how to, who can I hire to teach my management team who's not very good? I love how they put that in there to be better managers. I'm like, well, just do it.
Yeah.
If you do it, then they'll probably do it too, right? And nobody from the outside is going to teach them anything unless you do it too.
That's right. That's right. So what are the nuggets we want people to walk away with about feedback today? What do you think?
One, that it's a skill to be learned, mm-hmm. and that you get better at it all the time. And that when it becomes like breathing, then it's a skill you can use in your whole life.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. And then I think another one is, if you are a leader, you have a chance or a responsibility, I'm not sure which one you want to look at it as, to create this for yourself and for your team so that you can get better and then you can help them get better. And then I think if you give it with care and you give specific examples and you also give solutions, mm-hmm. or different things they can think about or consider, it's going to make the feedback better, and they'll hear it versus you just telling them what they did wrong. They'll hear it and they'll reflect on it.
I have two more nuggets. In the moment, as close to in the moment as possible, mm-hmm. in the meeting, thanks for that. That was super helpful, Jessica, when you've never spoken up before. Mm-hmm. Right. The second one is really, really how we started this podcast. Doing a great job, rewarding people for doing a great job. That's feedback too. And it's as important as mm-hmm. anything else.
Mm-hmm. The funny thing is, I've been giving my 4-year-old a lot of feedback.
And how's that working for
It's
you?
not working out as well as it doesn't work.
You know what I found with giving my 4-year-old granddaughter feedback? Is that it doesn't particularly work for her, but she's learned to do it for me.
I know.
Grandma, I don't like when you do it that way. I'd like you to do it this way. And I think, okay, that's useful.
He's learning to give me feedback too. And this morning I was, joking around with him. And so I was talking in a funny voice. He's like, I would prefer it if you don't use that voice. Please use your normal voice. It's like, little.
We've heard that from employees too, haven't we?
Patty, now we have career confessions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. My manager got me and the team to do anonymous 360 feedback forms, scoring each other on things like teamwork, accountability, communication, etc. However, some members of the team used the comment section to make personal jabs at others, leading it to be a petty, unanonymous process and creating really high tensions within the team. We're having an away day this week to conflict resolve, but I wanted to know a better way we can give each other feedback in the future without causing arguments like this. Is that what they call it? When you have an offsite, they call it an away day now instead of.
I like that.
I like that.
First thing I would say is one of the biggest problems with anonymous feedback is that when it's a personal jab like this, you know exactly who it is. Right? Yeah. You think that's why we
were giggling.
Yeah. I mean, I remember somebody saying early on, you and Reed have this hippy-dippy utopia fantasy about how work's supposed to be, and real companies don't operate like that. So one of these days, you're going to have to grow up and figure out how to be a corporation instead of a silly little experiment. So I went directly to the person. I'm like, wow, okay, so tell me more. She's like, well, how'd you know it was me? I'm like, come on. She goes over to her computer. She's like, oh yeah, it was me. I'm like, uh-huh. But so for number one, it's hardly ever anonymous. And second of all, that's what this whole podcast has been about. Like, it's just not helpful. It doesn't do anybody any good. To do personal jabs. And, it's back to your mama said, don't say anything that you wouldn't say to somebody's face. Mm-hmm. So, that's just childish, I guess.
It is. And so on this away day where you're going to conflict resolve, hopefully your leader shows up in that moment and has some good advice for the team. But I think one thing you could say is that as a teammate, I was disappointed in how we took personal jabs at one another. And I don't think that's constructive. And it's not the kind of team I'd like to work on.
And here's what I'd like to see instead.
Yeah.
I don't see why we can't just have conversations with each other about how we could be better.
That's and say, and better is great.
And the conflict, so this away day, if I were facilitating or you were facilitating, it would be, okay, let's use this time together to talk about how we could do this better.
Yeah.
Right. This, like you said, this wasn't particularly constructive. So instead of doing those things, what could we have done instead that would make the team better, rather than going, Jessica, you probably shouldn't say those mean things to Patty because you're always like cutting her down. I go,
But you know what?
I'm using my Valley Girl voice because that's what it feels like sometimes.
It's mean girl. I don't understand why when your name's not attached to it, you feel like you can say something mean to somebody and you would never do that to their face.
Girl,
right?
Don't you know about trolls?
I do, but I mean, I just don't.
Hello, you could be a troll at work too. It's the same.
I know, but I don't get it. Like to me, it makes, I don't know, it makes zero sense. Like I'm like, why? What?
You are not. No, has anyone ever told you are not normal?
Well, I guess that's true.
And I take that back. I mean, I'm saying that it's because we've retrained ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. We've retrained ourselves, like exactly the story I told, which was, I mean, it took me like 2 minutes to beeline down to this person and go, let's talk about what you just said.
Right.
And by the way, the end of that conversation was this person says, it's kind of like a cult. And if you aren't willing to walk up to somebody and tell them what you think about them and what they could do better to their face, then you don't get to play here. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah,
true.
You know, I mean, cult culture. I don't know. I mean, you're right.
Yeah,
You're right, because this is not
for everyone.
And yeah, are we trying to experiment with creating a different place to work? Yeah. But in fact, that's a great example of anonymous negative feedback that really helped me rethink how I communicated to employees about the kind of place we were trying to create. Mm-hmm. And then it actually framed, I had never thought about it this way. It framed the way I talk to people about what we did kind of forevermore and to this day. Like I tell people, they say, oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. It's too, and I say, you can experiment. If it doesn't work, then stop. Right. And that's the beauty. I say to them, look, this is kind of a crazy idea. Nobody else does it this way. And we could be totally wrong. But if we don't try, then we won't know. And so I guess it's a perfect example of everything. There's a nugget in there.
Mm-hmm. It's true. You know what my mama always said? Can't, never could.
One day we should do a podcast just on our mama's crazy sayings.
Yeah, our mama's crazy Southern sayings.
Yeah, mama's crazy saying. Mine is whenever I find out about an employee who is just really unhappy, I would say, my mama says misery loves company. And you are miserable. And you're making everybody else miserable, so knock that off.
Right. Yeah.
Mama's saying. So thank you for the great question, because it's a really good question.
It was very good. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.